My name is Ansel Cobb. I am 33 years old and I have worn a badge in Dunmore, Texas for 11 years now. I want to say up front that I am not much of a writer. I never was. I got through high school doing just enough to graduate, and the only reason I can string sentences together at all is because my mother made me read out loud to her every night at the kitchen table until I was 14. So if parts of this come out rough, that is why, and I would rather you know that now than expect something polished. I grew up on my father's cattle operation about 10 miles outside of town, 600 acres of scrub grass and mesquite that had already passed through 3 generations of Cobbs before it got to him. Everybody in the family assumed I would take it over one day. I loved that land, and I still do, but somewhere around the time I turned 16, I understood I did not want to spend the rest of my life inside the fence line of it. My father did not understand that for a long time, and we had more than a few hard conversations about it at that same kitchen table where I learned to read. It got easier once my younger brother made it clear he wanted the ranch more than I ever had. These days he runs it, and I drive out most Sundays to help him with whatever needs an extra pair of hands. I decided on police work the summer I turned 18, after a state trooper spent an afternoon helping my father and me get a truck out of a ditch during a bad storm, staying with us the whole time even though he clearly had other calls waiting on him. I remember thinking that was a job where showing up for people actually meant something specific, not just a general kind of decency. I held on to that thought all the way through the academy. I am not going to tell you exactly where in Texas Dunmore sits. That is not me being coy about it. It is just that if you are the kind of person this is meant for, you will find it on your own soon enough, and you will understand why I am careful about details like that by the time you finish reading this. You have probably lived somewhere like Dunmore yourself, or driven through a town just like it on a long trip and forgotten the name within the hour. 2,200 people, give or take, depending on who has moved in or out that year. One stoplight, right at the courthouse square. A diner that has served the same 6 items since before I was born. The kind of place where everybody waves at every car that passes, because odds are good they know exactly who is behind the wheel. All of that is true about Dunmore, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because pretending would defeat the entire purpose of me sitting down to write this out. But underneath that ordinary town, there are 5 rules that every officer in this department has to learn, usually the hard way, because until now, nobody ever wrote them down anywhere. They do not appear in any training manual. Nobody teaches them at the academy. You learn them from whoever trains you, a piece at a time, usually right before you need to know it the most, and sometimes right after it is already too late to matter for somebody else. I am writing them down now because things are changing here, and I will get into exactly why in a minute. I want you to understand something before I go any further, though. These are not superstitions some bored small-town cops made up to entertain themselves on slow nights. I have watched what happens to people who break them. I have buried a friend because of it. I am done letting new officers walk into this job blind, the way I did. So let me start at the beginning, back before I understood any of this, back when Dunmore was just the town I grew up 10 miles outside of, and nothing more than that. Dunmore sits out in cattle country, the kind of land where you can spot a truck coming from 2 miles off by the dust trail rising behind it. During the day, nothing about the town suggests there is anything wrong with it at all. Kids ride bicycles up and down Main Street after school. The hardware store owner props his front door open with a paint can from March through October. Old men sit outside the diner every morning arguing about football and weather, and that argument barely changes no matter what season it happens to be. I got hired onto the department at 22, straight out of the academy, and I was partnered with a man named Joey Marsh. Joey had already put in close to 20 years on the force by the time I met him, and he is closing in on 30 now. He is the kind of officer who never raises his voice, never seems rattled by anything, and somehow always seems to know what is about to happen about 10 seconds before it does. My first month on the job, we got called out to a domestic dispute at a trailer park on the edge of town. A husband and wife screaming loud enough that 3 neighbors had already called it in before we arrived. I was young enough to still think the job mostly meant showing up with authority and telling people to calm down. Joey walked in ahead of me, set his hat down on the kitchen counter, and spent 20 minutes just listening to both of them separately before anybody raised their voice again. Nobody got arrested that night. Nobody needed to be. I learned more about actual police work in those 20 minutes than I had in 6 months at the academy. That is the kind of training officer Joey was for me, patient and steady, teaching me how to talk a drunk man down without ever putting a hand on him, how to read a room before I walked into it, how to fill out a report so a lawyer could not pick it apart 6 months later sitting across a courtroom. Those are the things any department expects a training officer to pass along. What they do not tell you at the academy is that your training officer might also spend an evening driving you around town, pointing out small bags of salt hanging by people's front doors, and telling you that you need to remember exactly where every single one of them is. I noticed it during my first week on patrol. Nearly every house in Dunmore, from the nicest ones near the courthouse square to the trailers out past the feed store, had a small cloth pouch of salt hanging from a nail or a hook right by the front door. Not all of them even bothered locking their doors. Some of the older houses did not have a key that still worked in the lock at all, but every single one of them had that little bag of salt hanging there. I asked Joey about it during a slow shift. The two of us parked at the edge of the football field one evening watching a group of kids toss a football back and forth. I said, "Why does everybody in this town hang salt by their door instead of just locking it?" Joey did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on the field. He said, "Because it works better than a lock does, for the kind of thing we deal with out here." I laughed because I figured he was messing with a rookie the way senior officers sometimes do. He did not laugh back. He said, "Just remember where every one of them is. You never know when you might need to know that a particular house does not have one." I did not understand what he meant that night. I would understand it a lot better within my first year on this job. There are 5 things every officer in this department needs to know before they are any real good to anybody out here. Joey taught them to me one at a time over that first year, almost always right after something happened that made the lesson stick harder than any lecture could have. I am going to lay them out here in that same order, because I think the order matters, and because I think it will help you understand exactly why each one exists the way it does. Joey put in his retirement papers a few months ago. He turned 60 this year, and 30 years on a department this small is more than enough for anybody to give. Chief Boone has already started interviewing candidates for 2 open positions, since we are losing Joey and another senior officer named Hal Ruiz within the same year. That means Dunmore is about to get new officers who have never set foot in this county before, who will not have 30 years of somebody walking them around town, pointing out bags of salt, and telling them to remember where they are. That is why I am writing this down. Nobody ever put it on paper before me, not because any of it was some kind of closely guarded secret, but because the people who knew it best were never much for paperwork, and the rest of us just assumed there would always be somebody around to teach the next person the old way, face to face. I do not think that is a safe assumption to make anymore. So here it is, maybe for the first time in the history of this department. The first rule is simple. You never go into the red house at the end of Barb Road. Barb Road runs about 2 miles off the county highway, past the last working cattle operation on that side of town, and it dead ends at a 2-story house that has not been lived in since before I was born. The paint on it was red once, bright enough that people still call it the red house out of habit, but the color has faded down to more of a dull rust, peeling off the wood siding in long curling strips. The yard has not been mowed in decades. The grass grows waist-high by the middle of summer, and nobody from the county has ever bothered clearing it, Even though the property technically belongs to the county now through some old tax default, nobody remembers the details of any more. Every window on the ground floor and most of the second floor has been boarded over with plywood that has gone soft and gray with weather over the years. Every window except one. There is a single window on the second floor, on the side of the house facing the road, that has never been boarded over. Nobody currently working for this department has ever put a board on it, and as far as any of us know, nobody has ever taken one down from it either. It has simply always been open to the air, the glass long gone, a black square set into the side of that house that you can see clearly from the road if you know to look for it. Joey told me the story the first time he drove me out there, parked on the shoulder of Barb Road with the house sitting quiet at the end of it in the afternoon sun. There used to be a rhyme that kids around Dunmore learned from each other, the way children pass around rhymes for jump rope or hopscotch without anybody remembering exactly where they came from. Joey said his own mother taught it to him when he was small, and she told him her mother had taught it to her before that. Nobody can say for certain how old it actually is. It goes like this. Bath, bath, count to 5. Knock at the door and stay alive, salt on the step, keep your eyes down low, never say yes if she asks you to go. Nobody in town can tell you for certain who Bath was supposed to be. Some of the older residents say she was a woman who lived in that house close to 100 years ago, and that something happened to her there that nobody ever fully explained, not even at the time. Whatever the truth of it is, her name stuck to the house, and the rhyme stuck to her name, passed down through generations of kids who mostly forgot what it was even warning them about. The salt hanging by every door in town that I asked Joey about my first week goes back to that same rhyme. People here have been hanging it by their doors longer than anybody currently living can explain with any real certainty. Most of them could not tell you exactly why anymore if you stopped them on the street and asked. They just know their parents did it, and their parents before that, and something in them was never willing to be the generation that stopped. Here is what I can tell you for certain, because I have lived through it myself more than once. Every so often, usually late at night, a call comes into our dispatch line that traces back to a phone number matching the old red house on Barb Road. That house has had no working phone line for as long as anybody currently on this department can remember. There is no account on file with the phone company for that address at all. And yet the calls come in anyway, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, always sometime after midnight. Whoever answers hears a voice on the other end that sounds exactly like a person in real trouble. Sometimes it is a woman crying, saying somebody has broken into her house and she does not know what to do. Sometimes it is a man, calm at first, giving an address that does not exist anywhere in the county, then growing more frantic as the call goes on, saying that somebody is standing behind him right now, that he can hear them breathing. The voice never repeats itself from call to call. It has cried out as at least a dozen different women over the years I have worked here, and I have personally heard 3 different men's voices myself on that line. Every one of them sounds completely real in the moment. Every one of them is utterly convincing, right up until you check the address they gave you and find out it does not exist anywhere in the county, or it does exist, and the person living there has no idea what you are talking about when you show up asking. I took one of those calls myself about 3 years ago, working a slow overnight shift alone at the station. The voice was a woman, maybe 30 years old by the sound of it, saying her ex-boyfriend had broken in through her back door and she was hiding in a closet. She gave me an address on a street that does exist in this county, just not with that house number, since the numbering on that street only runs up into the 400s, and she gave me something in the 1100s. I said, "Ma'am, can you tell me again slowly what street you are on?" She gave me the same street name, then the same impossible number, her voice breaking, and I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. She asked me to please stay on the line with her. Please do not hang up. Please just talk to her until somebody got there. I looked at the clock on the wall. 40 seconds had already passed since I answered. I told her help was on the way, which was not exactly a lie since I intended to drive out and check the real version of that street myself. And I got off that call at 52 seconds by my count, faster than I wanted to for how genuinely scared she sounded, and I have never once regretted cutting it that short. There is another rule that goes along with this one, and Joey called it exactly that, another rule, the first time he explained it to me. You do not stay on the phone with that caller for more than a minute. You get whatever information you can in that first minute. You tell them help is coming, and then you find any reason at all to end the call. You do not let it run past 60 seconds, no matter how convincing the person on the other end sounds, no matter how much they beg you to stay. 30 years ago, before Joey's own career even started, there was an officer on this department named Roy Prout. Joey heard this story from the men who trained him, the same way I am passing it along to you now, second-hand but trusted all the same. Roy took one of those calls late one night while working dispatch alone at the station. The story goes that the voice on the other end belonged to a young man, maybe college age, saying he had wrecked his truck out past the county line and his leg was pinned under the dashboard, that he was scared and bleeding and did not want to be left alone out there in the dark. Roy stayed on that call. He stayed on it a long time, well past the minute he should have hung up. Another officer working that same night said Roy kept telling the caller just a little longer, hang on just a little longer, help is almost here, even though no actual help had been dispatched anywhere, because the address the young man gave did not correspond to any real location in the county. When Roy finally set the phone down, the other officer on shift said he did not look right anymore. His color was off, and something about the way he carried himself had changed. Over the following weeks, he started saying strange things during ordinary conversations, got a coworker's child's name wrong on an official report, and argued he had written it correctly when someone tried to correct him. 6 months after that phone call, Roy Prout went out on a routine night patrol and never radioed back in. His cruiser was found parked on the shoulder of the county highway the next morning, doors unlocked, engine still running, headlights still on. Nobody has ever found him. I never met Roy Prout myself. I only know him through a story passed down through 3 sets of officers before it ever reached me. But I believe every word of it, because of what I have lived through on that phone line myself, and because of how careful Joey was, every single time, to make sure I ended that call in time. We do not go into the red house. We do not stay on the phone with whoever calls from it. Nobody has ever explained to me exactly why, not in a way that would satisfy a scientist or a lawyer sitting across a table asking hard questions. I only know that the one time somebody stayed too long, he lost himself first, and then he lost everything else that came after. The next rule is just as important as the first. You never stop your car on Road 6. Road 6 is the stretch of county road connecting Dunmore to the highway, about 4 miles of 2-lane blacktop running through open pasture on both sides, fenced lines on either shoulder, and not much else to look at along the way. There are no streetlights on it, not a single one, for the entire 4 miles. Cell service drops out completely about halfway through, right where the road dips down and crosses a dry creek bed, and does not come back until you are close to the highway on one end or close to town on the other. By itself, none of that is especially unusual for a rural road out here. What is unusual is what happens on this particular one. Drivers report their headlights cutting out for a few seconds at a time, always somewhere in that same middle stretch near the creek crossing. It happens to high beams and low beams alike, and it happens whether the vehicle is 15 years old or brand new off the lot, whether the electrical system has ever given trouble before or not. The lights simply go dark for anywhere between 3 and 10 seconds, then come back on exactly as they were. We have had accidents on that stretch that do not add up when you look at them closely afterward. About 5 years ago, 2 ranchers named Gary Holt and Ben Farrell, men who had known each other 20 years and hunted together every fall, got into a shoving match on the shoulder of Road 6 that ended with Gary breaking Ben's nose over what started as an argument about who had the right of way at a spot with nothing else around for a mile in either direction. Neither man could explain afterward what had actually set them off. Gary told me at the scene, still breathing hard, 1 second we were just standing by the trucks talking, and the next thing I remember clear is my fist already swinging. We have had reports of phantom tailgating too. A woman named Sherry Doss called dispatch in a panic one night saying a truck had been riding her bumper the entire 4 miles with its brights on, flashing them at her over and over, refusing to pass even on the one straight stretch where passing would have been easy. When we pulled over the only truck matching her description on the other end of the road, the driver swore up and down he had been driving alone the whole way and had not seen another vehicle on Road 6 at all that night. We have had hitchhikers vanish on that road, too. I keep a drawer in my desk at the station with case files on people who went missing in and around Dunmore over the years, and more of those files trace back to Road 6 than to any other single location in the county. The one that bothers me most is a young man named Chris Doyle, 26 years old, last seen getting into the passenger seat of a pickup truck near the highway junction on a Friday night about 4 years ago. The driver of that truck was a rancher named Dale Whitmore, a man who had lived in this county his entire life and had no reason whatsoever to lie to us about anything. Dale told us he picked Chris up right at the junction. The two of them talked for maybe 2 minutes about nothing in particular, weather and football mostly, and then somewhere in that middle stretch near the creek, Dale glanced over and the passenger seat was simply empty. The door had never opened. The truck had never stopped moving. Chris Doyle's backpack and jacket were still sitting on the floorboard exactly where he had set them down. We searched that stretch of road and the pastures on both sides of it for 3 full days with everything the county could spare. We never found so much as a shoe. Joey told me, back when I first started riding that road on night patrol, that if I ever saw somebody standing on the shoulder of Road 6 after dark, especially anywhere near that creek crossing, I was not to stop the car, not to slow down more than the road itself required. Keep both hands on the wheel and drive the 4 miles through to the other side, no matter what I thought I was looking at. I want to tell you about a night I put that rule to the test myself, because until it happened to me, some small part of me had always wondered if I would actually be able to follow it when it mattered. It was about 2 years ago, close to 11 at night, when dispatch got a call from a woman named Patricia Kessler, who said her husband had walked out of the house after an argument, headed in the direction of Road 6 on foot, and had not come home 2 hours later. Dispatch related to me plain and simple, subject last seen walking east on Road 6, possible weather exposure, requesting a welfare check. She was worried because a storm was building to the west and he had left without a jacket. I took the call and headed out to check the road myself. The drive started out normal enough. I had my brights on, scanning both shoulders as I went, looking for a man walking alone. About 1.5 miles in, right as I hit that dip near the dry creek bed, my headlights cut out. I know that stretch of road well enough by now to keep the wheel steady, even blind, for a few seconds, and my hands still tighten on the wheel every time it happens, and it had happened to me plenty of times before that particular night. I eased off the gas and waited for the lights to come back the way they always did. When they did come back, there was a man standing on the shoulder about 30 yards ahead of me, on the right side of the road, facing the direction I was driving from. For half a second I felt real relief, because the description dispatch had given me matched close enough. A man in his 40s, dark jacket, thinning hair at the front. I started to ease off the gas to slow down. Then I noticed 2 things almost at the same moment. The wind had already started picking up ahead of that storm, strong enough that I could see the tall grass in the pasture behind him bending and moving steadily. His jacket did not move at all, not a flutter, not a single ripple in the fabric. And the moon was out that night, bright enough that I could see my own shadow stretched faintly across the dashboard from the glow off the road surface. He did not have one. Standing right there in that open moonlight, he cast no shadow onto the blacktop at all. I thought about Patricia Kessler back at her house, worried sick, waiting by the phone. I thought about how easy it would be to just stop the car right there, roll the window down, ask if he needed a ride. Every instinct I had built up as a police officer told me to stop that vehicle immediately. I thought about Joey's voice instead, low and steady the way it always is. I kept both hands on the wheel. I did not touch the brake pedal at all, and I drove straight through, past that man standing motionless on the shoulder, watching him in my rearview mirror as long as I could still see him. He never moved the entire time. He did not turn to watch me go. He simply stood there facing the same direction until the curve of the road finally took him out of my mirror completely. I made it the rest of the way to the highway junction, with my hands aching from how hard I had been gripping that wheel. I circled back around through the highway instead of driving Road 6 a second time that night, and I searched the shoulder from the opposite direction with two other units backing me up, spending almost 3 hours combing that pasture with flashlights. We never found Patricia Kessler's husband. Not that night, not during the search that continued through the following week, not ever since. Patricia still lives in Dunmore. I see her at the grocery store from time to time, and neither one of us has ever once brought that night up between us. There is one more rule I need to tell you about before I get to the last two, and this one is different from the others in an important way. This is the only rule that is actually written down anywhere official. It sits inside our department handbook, buried in a section with a title so boring that nobody would ever think twice about it: Procedures for Securing Unprocessed Anomalous Scene Evidence. Most small departments have some version of that section for things like unexploded ordnance left over from old ranch land or unstable structures after a fire. Ours has one line added to it that Chief Boone himself insisted on writing in, word for word, after what happened to my friend Nathan Cole. Any object or area at a scene that appears displaced, unfamiliar, or inconsistent with its surroundings must be marked with red tape at a distance of no less than 15 feet before any officer approaches closer. That is the official language, copied straight from the handbook. What it means in practice is simpler than it sounds. If something looks wrong at a scene, you do not walk up to it. You tie off a line of red tape around it from a safe distance. You back away, and you wait, either for it to resolve on its own or for somebody with more experience to tell you what happens next. The red tape itself comes out of an old tradition among ranchers and hunters in this part of Texas. Tying a strip of red cloth or ribbon around anything on a fence line or a trail that needed to be treated as dangerous, whether that was a rattlesnake den or a stretch of ground that had gone soft and unstable after heavy rain, somewhere along the way. This department adopted that same idea for anything at a scene that simply did not belong. I need to tell you what happened 11 years ago, because it is the reason this rule exists in writing at all, and because it remains the hardest thing I have ever had to put into words, even after all this time. Nathan Cole and I went through the academy together. We got hired onto the Dunmore department in the same month, both of us 22 years old, both of us new to the badge and proud of the uniform in a way you only are during that first year. Nathan was from a town about 60 miles east of here, and he had a way of making everybody around him laugh even on the worst days, the kind of easy humor that made a 12-hour shift feel shorter than it was. He used to say he became a cop because his older brother dared him to during a family cookout, and he never once let that dare go, 3 years running, bringing it up every time somebody asked why he chose the job. We spent most Tuesday evenings that first year eating dinner together at the diner on Main Street after our shifts overlapped, arguing about which one of us would make detective first in a department too small to actually have detectives, which was half the joke of it. Nathan always ordered the chicken fried steak with extra gravy, and he always tried to talk me into splitting a slice of pie afterward, even when neither one of us needed the calories. He kept a photo of his younger sister's kids taped inside his locker at the station, and he called his mother every single Sunday afternoon without fail. We were both still riding with training officers 11 months into the job when a call came in late on a September night. A rancher named Pete Alvarez had phoned dispatch saying something had come down during that afternoon storm and landed in his east pasture, something that did not look like it belonged out there, and it had spooked his cattle badly enough that half his herd had broken clean through a fence line trying to get away from whatever it was. Joey was training me that year. Nathan was riding with another senior officer named Frank DeLuca that same shift, and since both calls that night pointed toward the same stretch of ranch land, all four of us ended up out at the Alvarez place together, along with Pete himself waiting anxiously at the gate. Pete met us there looking rattled in a way that men who work cattle for a living, men who deal with difficult animals and bad weather as a matter of course, do not usually look. He pointed us toward the east pasture and told us flatly he was not going anywhere near it again that night, not for any amount of money. We walked out together with flashlights, the grass still wet from the storm that had rolled through that afternoon, thunder still rumbling somewhere off to the south as the front continued moving out across the county. About 200 yards in, our lights caught something lying flat in the grass ahead of us. From that distance it looked like a road sign, the kind you would see marking a speed limit or a curve ahead, knocked down and half buried in the mud, one corner of it catching our flashlight beams in a way that seemed almost reflective, almost metallic. Joey stopped all four of us right there, well back from it, and said the words I had already heard him say to me a dozen times before on quieter nights when nothing was actually at stake. Nobody gets closer until it is taped off. 15 feet minimum. I want 2 markers on it before anybody so much as breathes near that thing. Nathan laughed. I remember that laugh clearly, because it turned out to be the last thing about that entire night that felt normal to me. He said, "Joey, it is a stop sign. The wind probably ripped it clean out of the ground half a mile from here and dropped it somewhere in this pasture. I am not measuring off 15 feet from a stop sign." Frank told him to hold up, wait for the tape same as the rest of us, that the rule did not care what the thing looked like from a distance. Nathan was already walking before Frank finished the sentence. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because I have gone over it in my head more times than I could ever count, and I still do not have a clean explanation for it that satisfies me. Nathan crouched down next to that shape lying in the grass. He reached one hand toward the edge of it without any hesitation, quick and careless, already moving to grab it and toss it aside. The instant his fingers made contact with it, the shape was simply gone from where it had been lying, and Nathan made a sound I had never heard a person make before and have never heard since. It was not a scream exactly. It was short and it cut off completely all at once. It did not fade or trail away. It simply stopped. Joey was already running toward him before the sound had even finished. So was I. Frank had his weapon drawn, sweeping his flashlight beam wildly across the wet grass, but there was nothing left standing where Nathan had been crouched a second earlier. No shape in the grass anymore, no fallen sign, nothing at all. We found him 9 feet away, in a direction none of us had actually seen him move, lying in the wet grass. Joey reached him first and turned him over, and I heard Joey say his name twice, low and controlled, the exact same steady voice he uses for everything. But there was nothing in Nathan's face that answered him back. Pete Alvarez had followed us out despite what he said at the gate, and it was his radio call that brought 2 more units and an ambulance out to that pasture within 20 minutes, lights cutting across the dark field from the county road. Chief Boone arrived not long after that, still in the clothes he had been wearing at home, having driven out the second he heard Frank's voice on the radio. I remember him standing at the edge of that pasture for a long moment before he ever said a word to any of us, his jaw tight, just looking at the grass where it had happened. I will not describe more of that scene than I already have. I have told this part of the story exactly as much as I am willing to tell it, to anyone, ever, including you. What I will say is that whatever caused it happened in less time than it takes to say his name out loud, and that none of the four of us present, 3 trained officers and 1 rancher who came running from the gate at the sound, saw the moment itself clearly enough afterward to explain what it actually was. The county medical examiner's report listed the cause as undetermined, pending further investigation, and that investigation never produced anything more specific than that single line. Nathan's parents buried him 3 weeks later in that same town 60 miles east of here where he grew up, and I stood at that funeral in my dress uniform, trying to figure out what I would say to them if they ever asked me directly what really happened out in that pasture. Nobody ever asked me that question outright. Chief Boone was a younger man himself back then, only a few years into running this department, and he took Nathan's death about as hard as any of us did, harder than most people outside the department ever realized. Within a month, he had the red tape procedure written directly into the official handbook, the only rule out of everything I am telling you here that exists anywhere on paper before this document. He never explained his reasoning to the county commissioners beyond calling it a standard safety protocol for unidentified hazardous debris found at rural scenes. Every officer in this department who was here that year understood exactly what it really meant, and none of us ever corrected the official language, because the official language was doing exactly what it needed to do. I think about Nathan more than I let on to anybody, even to Joey, who was standing right there beside me that night and understands better than anyone alive what it cost. I still order the chicken fried steak with extra gravy sometimes when I stop in at that same diner on Main Street, though I could not tell you exactly why I keep doing that, other than it feels like the smallest possible way of keeping something of him around. Out of everything I am writing down here, this is the rule I have never once broken, not even close, not on my worst or laziest night. I have taped off things in this county that turned out to be nothing at all, ordinary trash or storm debris, that never did a single strange thing no matter how long I sat and watched it from a safe distance afterward. I would rather waste a full roll of tape and an hour of my shift 100 times over than find out the hard way, the way Nathan did, that the one time you decide it is not worth the bother is the exact time it matters most. After Nathan, things were different at the department for a long time. Nobody talked about it much out loud. But everybody moved a little more carefully on every call, checked things twice, that they might have once checked only once. That carefulness is probably part of why the next rule got taken as seriously as it did when it came up, even though what happened with it was strange in a completely different way than anything with Nathan. You do not go into the drainage tunnel, and if a black cat shows up before your shift starts, you stay away from that tunnel the entire night. The drainage system under Dunmore was built back in the 1950s, when the town finally put in proper storm sewers to stop Main Street from flooding every spring the way it used to. Most of that system is unremarkable concrete pipe, nothing anybody thinks twice about, the kind of infrastructure you forget exists until it backs up. But there is one section, the main channel that runs behind the old grain co-op building on the north side of town, that is tall enough for a grown man to duck through without needing to crawl. Kids have been daring each other to go into that particular stretch for as long as the co-op building itself has stood empty, which is going on 15 years now since the operation shut down. Here is the part that does not make sense, and I do not have an explanation for it any better than I have for anything else in this town. People who go into that tunnel from the co-op entrance do not always come out where the tunnel is actually supposed to lead them. The whole system was mapped decades ago by the city engineer at the time, and by every blueprint still on file at the courthouse, That particular channel runs about a quarter-mile south and empties into a runoff ditch near the elementary school. That is where it is supposed to come out. That is not always where people actually come out. The clearest example of why this rule matters is a boy named Kyle Foster, because unlike Nathan, he lived through it. Kyle was 13 years old, and he had a dog named Scout that he loved about as much as a kid can love anything. There was a bad storm that came through one afternoon in the spring, heavy rain falling fast enough to fill the drainage system dangerously quick. Scout got spooked by a close crack of thunder and bolted straight down the street. And Kyle's mother told us afterward that he chased that dog 3 blocks before losing sight of him right near the co-op building, right as the water in the drainage channel was already rising toward the top edge of that tunnel entrance. A neighbor named Dot Sanchez saw Kyle go into the tunnel after his dog, calling Scout's name into the dark opening before disappearing inside herself to try to pull him back. She told us later I yelled for him to stop. I got maybe 3 feet in after him, and then I could not see either one of them anymore, and I could not hear them either. Not the dog barking, not the boy calling, nothing. She is the only reason we knew where to even start looking that first night. We searched that runoff ditch by the elementary school first, obviously, since that is exactly where the tunnel was supposed to lead according to every map we had. We found nothing there at all, not so much as a wet footprint. Over the following 2 days, we searched every storm drain and access point on the city's official maps, divers going into the retention pond east of town, volunteers walking the pastures on both sides of the channel in long, slow lines, calling his name every few steps. Kyle Foster was gone for 3 full days, and I do not think I slept more than 6 hours total across all 3 of them. On the 3rd day, a woman named Ruth Hargrove, who still did part-time bookkeeping for the property even though the co-op itself had shut down, noticed something odd about one of the old storage silos on the grounds, a structure that had been sealed and padlocked since operations ended years earlier. She told me she had heard something like scratching coming from inside it while walking past to check the mail. When we got a pair of bolt cutters on that lock and finally got the door open, we found Kyle sitting on the concrete floor inside, alive, badly dehydrated, blinking against the sudden daylight, but alive. That silo sits at the opposite end of town from the elementary school runoff ditch, more than 1.5 miles away by road, with absolutely no physical connection to the drainage system whatsoever according to any record that exists. It does not appear on any map of the storm sewers at all. It had been locked from the outside the entire 3 days, and the lock itself showed no sign of ever having been tampered with or forced. Kyle never told us how he got there. His mother said in the weeks that followed that he would go quiet in the middle of ordinary conversations, staring at nothing in particular for a few seconds before continuing on without any explanation. He stopped wanting to walk anywhere near the north side of town, even to check the co-op parking lot for any sign that Scout had turned up on his own. Scout was never found, not once, in all the time since. The Foster family moved away from Dunmore about a year later, out to live near Kyle's grandparents in another county entirely. I do not blame them for that decision even a little. I was part of that search team for all 3 days, and I have never forgotten how it felt walking that empty tunnel entrance at night with a flashlight, calling a 13-year-old boy's name into a space where the beam did not seem to travel quite as far as it should have. As for the black cat, that part of the rule came out of something separate, something officers in this department noticed independently of Kyle's case, though it was around that same general time that we all started paying real attention to the pattern. More than one officer over the years has reported a black cat sitting near the co-op entrance right before a strange call came in that same night, always somewhere near that tunnel, never anywhere else in town with the same consistency. Joey saw it himself twice across his career, both nights ending with something he still will not describe to me in detail even now. Hal Ruiz, the other officer retiring alongside Joey this year, told me once that he saw it exactly one time, early in his own career, and made a point after that of always checking the loading dock before starting any shift that put him anywhere near that side of town. I have seen the cat myself once, sitting perfectly still on the loading dock of the co-op building at the very start of a night shift, watching me without moving, without any particular urgency. I did not approach it, and I did not go anywhere near that tunnel entrance for the rest of that shift. Nothing happened to me that night. I cannot tell you for certain whether that is because I stayed away from the tunnel, or because it simply was not going to be my turn regardless of what I did. I am not especially interested in ever finding out which one of those two things was actually true. The last rule I am going to tell you about involves the old post office downtown, the building on the corner of Main and 2nd that has not operated as an actual post office since the new one went up along the highway about 20 years ago, back when the Postal Service consolidated a lot of these smaller rural branches into fewer, larger locations. The old building still stands. Nobody has ever torn it down, mostly because it belongs to the county now and nobody in county government wants to spend the money on demolition for a building that is not actually hurting anybody just by standing there empty on a corner most people barely glance at anymore. The rule is this: you do not open a letter that shows up in that old mail slot. You do not read it out loud to anybody. And you do not deliver it yourself, not if the name written on the envelope belongs to somebody who is dead or somebody who is currently missing. That old post office has been locked up tight for as long as I have been an officer here. Dead-bolted front and back, boarded windows, same as the red house out on Barb Road. Though nobody in town seems entirely certain who is officially responsible for maintaining that lock or checking on the building at all anymore. And yet, every so often, somebody notices a letter sitting in the old brass mail slot on the front door, visible from outside through the slot itself, sometimes with an edge of the envelope poking through as if it had been pushed partway out toward the street from inside. These letters never have stamps on them. They never have a return address in the corner, but the handwriting on every single one of them looks completely ordinary, a name and an address in regular pen, nothing about the actual penmanship that would strike you as unusual if you saw it written anywhere else. Joey told me about 2 letters that appeared before I ever joined the department. One addressed to a farmer who had drowned in a stock tank the winter before, another addressed to a teenage girl who ran away from home and was never located, her file still sitting in that same drawer where I keep Chris Doyle's case. In both instances, the letter simply vanished from the slot within a few days of being reported and logged, without anyone ever opening that door or touching what was inside. I got called out to that building myself about a year and a half ago. A woman named Carol Jennings, who lives 2 doors down from the old post office, called the station saying she had noticed an envelope sitting in the slot that morning while walking her dog past it, and when she stopped to look closer out of simple curiosity, she saw the name on it clearly enough to make her genuinely uneasy. The name on the envelope was Loretta Shaw. Loretta Shaw had passed away 2 weeks before that call came in. She had lived in Dunmore her entire life, run the flower shop on the square for almost 40 years, and died peacefully at home according to her family. Nothing sudden or strange about it at all. Just an older woman whose heart finally gave out one evening while she was sitting in her own living room. Her funeral had been well attended. Half the town showed up to it, myself included, since she had sold my mother flowers for every occasion I could remember growing up. I drove over to the old post office within 20 minutes of getting that call from dispatch. Sure enough, there was an envelope sitting in the slot, clearly visible from the sidewalk, addressed in plain handwriting to Loretta Shaw, no stamp anywhere on it, no return address. And the street address written on the front matched the house she had lived in for decades right down to an apartment number that did not actually apply to her single-family home, a small detail that still bothers me when I think about it too long. I did not touch that door. I called it in exactly the way procedure requires, logged the location and the exact name on the envelope, and requested the building be resealed and the incident filed away same as always. Nobody delivers those letters. Nobody ever has, as far as any record in this department shows going back decades. They simply get logged, and eventually, when somebody checks the slot again, they are gone without anyone ever having opened that door to remove them. My grandfather used to talk about that old post office too, long before I ever became an officer myself, back when I was young enough to think it was just a spooky story old men liked telling each other on a cold evening. He used to say it plain, half joking but never quite laughing when he said it. Death must work a part-time job here in Dunmore, filling in odd hours whenever it does not have anything better to do elsewhere. And that old post office building is exactly where it clocks in. I did not understand what he meant back then. I understand it a good deal better now, sitting here writing this down for you. There is something about this particular rule that sits with me differently than the others do. The Red House is a specific place I know to avoid entirely. Road 6 is a specific stretch of road I can drive through carefully, hands steady on the wheel. The drainage tunnel is a location I know exactly to stay clear of, checking the loading dock before every shift that takes me near it. But a letter can show up addressed to absolutely anybody in this town, and there is no way to know ahead of time whose name might end up written on one of those envelopes next. I try not to think about it too often, what it would actually mean to walk past that old post office some ordinary morning and see my own name looking back at me through that brass slot. I have not seen it yet. I hope I never do. But I would be lying to you if I said the thought has never once crossed my mind on a slow night, driving past that dark building on my way home after a long shift. Not much has changed in Dunmore since I first pinned on this badge 11 years ago. The diner still serves the same 6 items it always has. The old men still argue about the same things outside it every single morning. And all 5 of those rules I have just told you about still stand exactly the way they did when Joey first walked me through them, one at a time, usually right after something happened that made the lesson impossible to ever forget again. Joey's last day is coming up at the end of this month. Chief Boone has already hired 2 new officers to fill the gap that he and Hal Ruiz are leaving behind after this year, a man named Marcus Webb and a woman named Julie Prentice, both of them transferring in from departments over in the eastern part of the state, both of them good on paper and eager in the way everybody is at the start of this job. Neither one of them has ever set foot in this county before. Neither one of them has any idea yet what they are actually walking into come their first night shift alone. That is why I decided to write all of this down, instead of trusting that somebody would simply pass it along the old way, in bits and pieces, usually right when it was almost too late for it to matter to the person hearing it. I have been the one learning these rules on the fly myself. I have watched a close friend die because he genuinely believed one of them was not worth taking seriously. I am not willing to let that happen to somebody else if there is anything at all I can do to prevent it from happening again. So if you are reading this because you are new here, or because you are about to be, I want you to hear this directly from me, plainly, without any dressing up. Stay away from the Red House at the end of Barb Road entirely, and if a call ever comes in from a number tracing back to it, get whatever information you need in that first minute and then get off the line, no matter how badly the voice on the other end wants you to stay a little longer. Never stop your car on Road 6 after dark, no matter what you think you see standing on the shoulder, no matter how much it looks exactly like the person you are out there searching for. Tape off anything at a scene that looks wrong before you ever get close to it, every single time, even when it looks like nothing more than an old road sign some storm blew loose in a pasture. Stay completely out of the drainage tunnel behind the old co-op building, and if you see a black cat sitting near that entrance before your shift even starts, find yourself a reason to spend the night somewhere else in town instead. And if you ever see an envelope sitting in the slot of that old post office downtown, leave it exactly where it is, whatever name happens to be written across the front of it. I cannot tell you why any of this is true. I have been an officer in this county for 11 years now, and I still do not have an explanation that would satisfy anybody looking for one, myself included some nights. I only know what I have personally seen, what I have lived through, and what I helped carry a friend's casket over. That has been more than enough to keep me careful every single day I have put on this uniform since. I want you to understand something else, too, before you close this out. None of what I have just told you has broken me. I still love this job every bit as much as I did the day I graduated the academy. I still love this town, even with everything I have just laid out about what lives underneath it. I have a good life here, people I care about deeply, a badge I am proud to put on every morning, and a partner who taught me everything worth knowing and is about to walk out that station door for the last time after 30 years of keeping this town safer than anybody outside of it will ever fully understand or appreciate. Whatever it is that this town is carrying underneath its ordinary surface, it has not taken any of that away from me, and I do not intend to let it start now. Believe whatever you want to believe about everything I have written here. I would probably have a hard time believing it myself if I had not lived through every part of it firsthand. All I can tell you for certain is that I am still here, still walking these streets every night on patrol, still writing these words out with my own two hands at my kitchen table, and that has to count for something real. Just remember the 5 rules. And remember that here in Dunmore, the ordinary and the impossible live on the very same street.